America has built legends and total disasters. Behind the muscle and chrome, some cars were death traps disguised as classics. Weak frames, bad engineering, and zero safety made them killers on wheels. These weren't just bad designs. They cost real lives. Here are the 10 worst American cars ever made. The machines that proved not every classic deserves love. The Kaiser Special, produced from 1947 to 1950, was born from a mix of post-war optimism and industrial overconfidence. After World War II, the American automotive market was hungry for something new. Millions of returning soldiers and growing families were ready to buy cars again, and new companies saw an opening to challenge the dominance of Ford, GM, and Chrysler. Henry J. Kaiser, a self-made industrialist famous for building Liberty ships during the war, believed he could out-innovate Detroit. His partnership with Joseph W. Frazier led to the formation of Kaiser Frazier, a company that promised modern design, advanced engineering, and bold independence. Their flagship offering, the Kaiser Special, was meant to symbolize progress and prosperity. But beneath its shiny, streamlined exterior lay one of the most dangerously underbuilt cars of the late 1940s. The design was elegant for its time, with smooth curves, a wide chrome grille, and an aerodynamic silhouette that stood out among boxier competitors. The interior featured plush bench seats, tasteful trim, and a dashboard that looked almost European in its simplicity. Buyers loved the idea of a fresh, non-Detroit car, something modern, something different. Unfortunately, the Kaiser Special was built too fast, with too many compromises. Kaiser's factories had limited access to new, high-quality steel after the war, so they used recycled metal from leftover military stockpiles. That steel, often brittle and inconsistently tempered, created body panels that were thin and weak. Under the surface, the welds holding the unibody together were rushed and sloppy. In crash tests and real-world accidents, the seams often burst open like a cracked egg. Survivors of collisions reported sharp, twisted shards of metal slicing through the cabin like shrapnel. Mechanically, the Kaiser Special's engineering was equally alarming. The steering system, based on a recirculating ball design, had a tendency to jam at the worst possible times. A sudden turn at moderate speed could lock the front wheels solid, sending the car into a skid or an uncontrolled spin. Even worse, the front suspension was prone to catastrophic failure. Poorly heat-treated components could snap under strain, causing the front end to collapse completely. Drivers who experienced it described the terrifying moment when the front of the car simply dropped onto the pavement mid-drive. Brakes were another weak point. Though hydraulic, they were undersized for the car's considerable weight, fading quickly on long descents. On highways, the car floated uncertainly, with loose steering and unpredictable handling that made every curve a small gamble. The Kaiser Special's construction flaws turned minor accidents into gruesome disasters. The car's rigid unibody transmitted impact forces directly into the cabin, and without crumple zones or reinforcements, passengers absorbed the full energy of every collision. The solid steering column had no collapse mechanism, meaning that in a head-on crash, it often drove straight into the driver's chest. The dashboard was pure steel, with large knobs and protruding edges that acted like blunt weapons. Even the seat frames, made of sharp, unfinished metal, could bend or break during impact, impaling occupants. Safety glass was still a luxury item, and many early cars used brittle panes that shattered into dangerous fragments on contact. Despite these dangers, the Kaiser Special initially sold well because it looked advanced and came from a company that spoke the language of progress. But by 1949, word had spread among owners and mechanics that the car was unreliable and unsafe. Dealers quietly began reporting steering box failures and suspension collapses. Mechanics joked that the Kaiser was the only car that dies before you do. A 1948 owner's letter published in a California newspaper read, "She's pretty to look at, but I never drive her faster than 40. I don't trust her to stay in one piece." Some even reported that repeated stress from normal driving caused cracks to form in the body seams near the doors and fenders. Kaiser Frazier's ambition to beat Detroit turned into a cautionary tale about rushing innovation without rigorous testing. While competitors like Ford and Chevrolet invested in improving chassis stiffness, brake performance, and steering precision, Kaiser Frazier focused more on marketing and production numbers. The company's factories, once so successful at wartime shipbuilding, weren't optimized for mass-producing complex automobiles. The result was a vehicle that looked modern but behaved like a pre-war prototype, dangerously unstable, structurally weak, and mechanically unreliable. Today, the Kaiser Special is remembered less as a collectible and more as a historical curiosity. Surviving examples are rare, often found in museums or enthusiast collections as symbols of post-war American ambition gone wrong. Collectors who restore them note that the cars must be extensively reinforced to be safely drivable by modern standards. Yet, in a strange way, the Kaiser Special remains important. It represents the high hopes and harsh lessons of America's transition into the modern automotive age. It showed that looks and innovation meant nothing without durability and safety. In the end, the Kaiser Special's legacy is that of a dream undone by haste. It was a car born from the optimism of a nation rebuilding itself, a bold experiment that promised the future but delivered danger. Beautiful, modern, and fatally flawed, it was the embodiment of an era when style and ambition still outweighed caution. And though the company would go on to make safer, better cars in the following years, the Special's reputation as the car that wanted to die before you did remains a haunting epitaph for one of the most dangerously overpromised machines of its time. The Ford Deluxe, produced from 1941 to 1948, stands as one of the most iconic yet perilously outdated American cars of the mid-century. When it debuted before World War II, it was a stylish machine, sleek, confident, and affordable, embodying the optimism of pre-war America. But when Ford resurrected it almost unchanged after the war, that once modern design had become a relic of a more dangerous automotive era. The returning GIs, flush with savings and eager to embrace civilian life, saw the Deluxe as a symbol of success and freedom. Unfortunately, it was also a rolling death trap, carrying forward the brutal engineering philosophy of the 1930s into an age that was quickly learning how lethal those old ideas could be. Structurally, the Deluxe was built like a tank, and that was precisely the problem. Its body-on-frame construction was immensely strong, but completely rigid, meaning that in a crash, there was no energy absorption at all. Every ounce of force from an impact traveled directly into the cabin and into the bodies of its occupants. The steering column was a single solid metal rod that pointed straight toward the driver's chest like a spear. In even a low-speed frontal collision, it could impale the driver, often fatally. Survivors of such crashes would later describe the feeling as being stabbed by the car itself. The dashboard, a glimmering expanse of painted steel and chrome, looked beautiful, but was merciless in an accident. There were no padded surfaces, no collapsible components, and no seatbelts, only bare metal, hard knobs, and edges that turned deadly the instant something went wrong. The windshield was another hazard entirely. Before laminated safety glass became standard, Ford used brittle plate glass that shattered into thin knife-like fragments on impact. In head-on collisions, it wasn't uncommon for drivers or passengers to be severely cut or even partially decapitated by flying shards. Period accident reports often read more like battlefield dispatches than car crash summaries. The irony wasn't lost on many returning veterans. They had survived the war only to find themselves driving a vehicle that could kill them just as efficiently. On the road, the Ford Deluxe felt as heavy as it looked. Its famed flathead V8 engine gave it strong acceleration for its time, but that power came with treacherous handling. The car's narrow bias-ply tires struggled to maintain grip, and the combination of a heavy engine and a high front weight bias made the car prone to understeer and unpredictable slides. Braking was handled by primitive drum brakes, which overheated quickly and faded under pressure. Steering was vague and heavy, requiring constant correction. On wetter gravel roads, the Deluxe could fishtail with very little provocation, especially in turns. Mechanics of the time often warned inexperienced drivers to steer the Deluxe like a horse, with respect and fear. For soldiers coming home from the battlefield, the Ford Deluxe represented both nostalgia and normalcy. Ford marketed it as the car that built America before the war, and now it was building America again. Ads showed happy families and proud veterans behind the wheel, promising strength, comfort, and reliability. What they didn't mention was that the car's pre-war design hadn't been updated to reflect even the most basic safety understanding of the late 1940s. Cars from General Motors and Nash were beginning to experiment with collapsible steering columns, better braking systems, and improved glass. But Ford clung stubbornly to the old ways, trusting the familiar formula that had worked a decade earlier. Inside, the Deluxe was spacious and comfortable in a simple, no-nonsense way. Wide bench seats covered in mohair or vinyl invited long drives, and the flathead V8 made highway cruising smooth and effortless. But all of that comfort masked the danger waiting just below the surface. Inside impacts, the doors often burst open, throwing passengers onto the pavement. Seatbelts were not only not available, they were discouraged, as carmakers of the time feared that mentioning safety might scare off buyers. Ford brochures bragged about the strength of its steel body, but that rigidity became its greatest flaw in a crash. Safety engineers decades later would use cars like the Deluxe to demonstrate exactly why vehicles needed crumple zones and deformable structures. Many owners learned those lessons the hard way. One 1947 owner from Illinois recalled in a 1950 letter to a newspaper that his brother hit a tree at maybe 30, and the steering wheel crushed his chest like it was made of paper. Another described losing control on a dirt road. The back end stepped out, the tires grabbed, and the car rolled like a barrel. When it stopped, the roof was down to the seat cushions. For every lucky survivor, there were dozens who didn't make it out. By the time Ford introduced its all-new 1949 models, the Deluxe was quietly retired, its pre-war bones finally put to rest. The 49 Ford ushered in a safer, more modern design era, with improved visibility, a lower center of gravity, and at least some consideration for occupant protection. But the damage to the Deluxe's legacy had already been done. Though it sold in huge numbers and remains beloved among vintage enthusiasts today for its looks and historical significance, it was a profoundly unsafe car to drive, a relic from a time when styling and simplicity outweighed any thought of survivability. Today, restored examples of the Ford Deluxe gleam proudly at classic car shows, admired for their timeless lines and that distinctive flathead rumble. But to drive one on modern roads is to experience just how raw and dangerous early post-war motoring could be. It was a car that symbolized America's return to peace, yet carried within it all the brutal hazards of a world that had not yet learned how to protect its own drivers. In many ways, the Ford Deluxe wasn't just a car, it was a warning from another age, a reminder that beauty and danger often rode side by side on the highways of the past. The Chevrolet Fleetline, produced between 1941 and 1952, remains one of the most visually striking cars of its era. A design masterpiece with its flowing fastback lines, long sweeping fenders, and a roofline that seemed to glide straight into the trunk like a single brushstroke of steel. To the public eye, it represented the height of post-war elegance, an affordable American car that looked almost European, sleek and futuristic against the boxier sedans of the time. Yet beneath that seductive beauty lay a dark truth. The Fleetline was among the most dangerous cars Chevrolet ever built, a machine whose rigid body and primitive mechanics made it one of the deadliest ways to travel at speed in the 1940s. The Fleetline's greatest sin was its structure. Chevrolet engineers, working with technology and materials developed before the war, built the car using a rigid ladder frame combined with heavy, non-deformable steel panels. This gave the Fleetline an impression of solidity. Doors shut with a confident clunk, and owners often praised its sturdy feel. But in reality, that stiffness was lethal. There were no crumple zones, no areas designed to absorb energy in a crash. When the Fleetline struck another car or an obstacle, the body hardly deformed. Instead, All the kinetic force was transmitted directly to the passengers. Drivers were often thrown forward into the solid steel dashboard, or skewered by the steering column, which was a single unyielding rod that had no give whatsoever. Safety glass was not standard in the early models, and in many accidents, windshields shattered into jagged fragments that turned the cabin into a storm of cutting shards. Adding to the danger was the Fleetline's suspension, which was rooted in pre-war design and poorly suited to the heavier post-war body. It used simple coil springs up front and leaf springs in the rear, a setup that gave a soft floating ride on smooth highways, but quickly turned disastrous on uneven roads or during hard cornering. The car's high center of gravity and narrow track width made it prone to body roll and lurching. When entering a sharp turn, the Fleetline would pitch violently, and in extreme cases, the inside wheels could lift off the ground. Mechanics at the time often warned, "Don't take a Fleetline into a curve faster than 35, or it'll take you somewhere else." The car's weight distribution, with much of the mass sitting over the front axle due to the heavy inline-six engine, further worsened its handling balance. Then there were the brakes. Simple hydraulic drums on all four wheels, which were barely adequate when new and terrifying once worn. Under repeated use, especially on long descents, they faded rapidly as the fluid overheated and the drums expanded. Period road tests noted that stopping distances could more than double after a few hard applications. On steep mountain roads, it wasn't uncommon for Fleetline drivers to rely on downshifting just to slow down. The phrase, "no brakes, no chance," became an unspoken rule among owners who dared to push the car beyond its comfort zone. Inside, the Fleetline was pure 1940s glamour and pure 1940s danger. The dashboard gleamed with chrome trim, hard knobs, and polished bezels. The seats were wide and soft, but offered zero restraint. There were no seatbelts, and none could be ordered from the factory. In collisions, passengers were often thrown forward into the dashboard or out through the windshield. The metal interior fittings, which looked luxurious in the showroom, became weapons in an accident. Mechanics, ambulance crews, and police officers soon learned what to expect when arriving at a Fleetline crash: blood on the dash, shattered glass, and sharp metal edges that cut deep. It earned the grim nickname, the Steel Coffin, among those who worked the aftermath of crashes, a name that stuck, whispered half in respect for its beauty, half in fear of its cruelty. Even at lower speeds, the car could be treacherous. The combination of its heavy front end, vague steering, and bias-ply tires made it difficult to control on wet or gravel roads. Drivers described it as sailing a ship without a rudder, and many accidents occurred simply from losing traction during ordinary maneuvers. The steering column, being rigid and unpadded, was the final insult. In a frontal impact, it would often collapse backward, not telescopically, but as a solid spear into the driver's chest. The technology for collapsible columns would not appear for another decade, and the Fleetline's design predated even the basic understanding of kinetic safety. Yet paradoxically, people loved the car. The Fleetline's design was unlike anything else in its price range, and its smooth six-cylinder engine was quiet and reliable. Chevrolet sold hundreds of thousands of them, and they became beloved family cars, wedding cars, and even drag race projects decades later. But the car's reputation for poor accident survival was no secret. In small towns and rural America, stories circulated of Fleetlines folding drivers against their steering wheels or snapping spines in rollover crashes. Even mechanics who adored the car's looks warned customers never to trust it above 50. The irony of the Fleetline's name was not lost on anyone familiar with its flaws. It was meant to suggest speed, grace, and modern engineering. A car shaped by the wind, streamlined like a ship at sea. But on real highways, it handled like a ship too, with long delays between steering input and response. The brakes felt as if they belonged to a vehicle twice as old, and in emergency situations, the car's rigidity turned survivable accidents into fatal ones. For all its beauty, it was a reminder of how far form could lead engineers astray when safety wasn't yet a consideration. Today, the Chevrolet Fleetline stands as a symbol of both the best and worst of its era. Collectors still revere its design, and custom builders transformed surviving examples into stunning hot rods with modern drivetrains, disc brakes, and reinforced frames, the improvements it always needed but never received from the factory. Those who restore Fleetlines often admit that while they look breathtaking, driving one stock on modern roads feels like holding hands with death in a tuxedo. In its time, the Fleetline captured America's post-war confidence, bold, stylish, and strong, but that strength came at a cost. It was a car that gave its drivers beauty and pride, yet demanded in return their caution, their skill, and sometimes their lives. The Fleetline remains a haunting contradiction, a masterpiece of motion that, when it stopped suddenly, showed just how unforgiving the golden age of design could be. The Hudson Commodore, produced between 1946 and 1952, was one of the grandest expressions of post-war American optimism, a car that exuded strength, prestige, and speed. With its sleek step-down body design and powerful straight-eight engine, it looked and felt like a rolling symbol of success. On open highways, the Commodore seemed unstoppable, gliding with a level of refinement that rivaled Cadillac and Packard. Yet beneath that air of sophistication hid a deeply dangerous reality. The very engineering that made the Hudson Commodore feel advanced on paper made it a silent killer in practice. A car whose sheer mass, flawed handling, and brutal construction turned even minor crashes into deadly events. The Commodore's most distinctive feature was its step-down design, where Hudson proudly innovated that the floor pan sat below the height of the frame rails. This created a lower center of gravity and a feeling of being cradled within the car rather than sitting on top of it. Advertisements hailed it as a leap forward in safety and stability. In theory, it should have been. In practice, however, it had one fatal flaw. The structure was incredibly rigid. There were no crumple zones, no designed areas to absorb impact. In collisions, the frame transmitted the full force of the crash directly into the cabin. Passengers inside the Commodore became part of the structure's kinetic equation, absorbing the shock with their bodies. Survivors of Commodore crashes often described it as being hit twice, once by what you hit, and again by your own car. At nearly 4,000 pounds, the Commodore was built like a tank, but braked like one too. The drum brakes were small, outdated, and completely overmatched by the car's size. On long descents or in emergency stops, they faded almost instantly, forcing drivers to rely on downshifting and prayer. Period road testers complained of the terrifying delay between pressing the pedal and feeling any deceleration. One 1948 review bluntly stated, "The Hudson stops only when the driver runs out of courage." Worse still, the steering was slow and vague, requiring multiple turns of the wheel just to correct a small drift. The car's massive bulk gave it a sense of invincibility, but it also meant that once it started to slide, it was almost impossible to recover. Owners often learned too late that the Commodore's composure on straight roads vanished entirely when the car was pushed through a curve. Rollovers were particularly deadly. The Hudson's solid steel roof, part of Hudson's integral unibody construction, lacked any deformation points. When the car flipped, the roof didn't crumple, it collapsed inward in one piece, crushing anyone beneath it. Because the body was built as a single welded shell, there were no safety pillars or reinforcements designed to maintain the passenger compartment's shape. What Hudson had intended as aerodynamic strength became a death sentence in rollovers, with the car's immense weight collapsing like a steel trap. In side impacts, the doors were another weak point. They were thin and mounted on simple hinges with no internal beams. Even low-speed collisions could fold them inward, pinning occupants against the seats or ejecting them entirely. Inside the Commodore was a study in 1940s luxury: broad bench seats, deep carpets, rich upholstery, and a gleaming chrome dashboard that looked like something out of an Art Deco train. Unfortunately, that same beauty turned lethal in a crash. The dash was lined with thick chrome trim and protruding metal knobs that could shear flesh or fracture skulls on impact. The steering wheel was large, rigid, and mounted on a solid, non-collapsible column, a common trait of the era, but one that made frontal impacts especially horrifying. Drivers were often impaled or crushed against their own steering wheels. It was the kind of car where even the interior design could kill you. Yet despite its dangers, people adored the Commodore. It was smooth, elegant, and powerful, offering a sense of prestige that rivaled far more expensive marques. On long, straight roads, it was serene, quiet, comfortable, almost effortless. The straight-eight engine produced generous torque, and the ride was soft and plush. But it was precisely this illusion of safety and stability that made the Hudson Commodore so deadly. It incurred speed and confidence in a machine that had no forgiveness when something went wrong. A moment's distraction on a wet road, a misjudged turn, or a failed brake pedal could turn the Commodore's luxury into a coffin. By the early 1950s, when newer models from GM and Ford introduced stronger brakes, safer steering, and more predictable handling, the Hudson's flaws became undeniable. Accident investigators and mechanics began to notice the pattern: crushed roofs, folded doors, steering columns driven into torsos. In rural America, the Hudson gained a grim reputation. Some tow truck drivers called it the heavy sleeper because so many accident victims inside never woke up. Today, the Hudson Commodore is remembered fondly by collectors for its elegant design, its powerful engines, and its historical significance as one of the first mass-produced unibody cars. Restored examples gleam beautifully at car shows, a reminder of when American automakers dared to innovate boldly. But beneath that polished nostalgia lies a darker story, that of a car that outpaced its own safety. Modern restorers who drive them often retrofit better brakes, stronger tires, and seat belts, knowing full well the dangers that lurk beneath its beautiful curves. In the end, the Hudson Commodore embodied both the brilliance and the blindness of its era. A car that looked ahead in engineering, but lived firmly in a time before safety meant survival. It was a magnificent machine that gave its drivers pride and power, yet demanded absolute respect and caution. Those who ignored that balance often paid the price. For all its beauty and prestige, the Commodore was a reminder that in the golden age of chrome and steel, even the finest luxury could turn deadly in an instant. The Studebaker Champion, produced from 1947 to 1952, is often remembered as a bold statement of post-war optimism, a car that promised modernity, style, and innovation in an era hungry for progress. Its design was revolutionary for its time, a sweeping, aerodynamic body that seemed to glide rather than drive, with low sloping fenders, a long, elegant hood, and a wraparound rear window that hinted at speed and sophistication. From a distance, the Champion looked like a triumph of industrial design, an embodiment of the American dream, combining elegance with affordability. On paper and in showrooms, it appeared to offer the perfect blend of beauty, practicality, and modern engineering. Yet beneath its stylish exterior, the Champion harbored a series of deeply troubling design flaws that made it far more dangerous than the average post-war vehicle. Its chassis, while light and economical, was also top-heavy. This contributed to unpredictable handling, especially at highway speeds, where the steering could suddenly become vague or twitchy. Drivers often reported that sharp maneuvers or emergency swerves could cause the car to react in unexpected ways, making it prone to losing control. In extreme cases, the steering column could seize, effectively robbing the driver of the ability to maneuver, which, in the era of unprotected roads, could mean certain disaster. The irony of the name Champion became clear to many owners who found themselves struggling to keep the car under control in everyday driving situations. Mechanically, the Champion was equally treacherous. Its electrical system was notoriously unreliable, prone to shorts that could disable critical functions without warning. Perhaps even more alarming, the fuel line ran dangerously close to the exhaust manifold. Any minor leak, combined with the heat of the engine, could ignite the vehicle in an instant. Owner anecdotes and period reports document instances of spontaneous engine fires, often catching drivers completely off guard. These fires could engulf the car before the driver or passengers had time to react, turning the Champion from a stylish vehicle into a moving death trap in seconds. Crash safety was virtually non-existent. The Champion's frame and body panels were thin and brittle, offering little protection during even minor collisions. There were no crumple zones, side reinforcements, or energy-absorbing structures. Any crash force was transmitted directly into the cabin compartment. The dashboard was a wall of steel, the steering column rigid and pointed directly at the driver's chest, and there was a complete absence of interior padding. During frontal collisions, the firewall could collapse into the cabin, crushing the driver's legs, while side impacts often forced doors inward, leaving occupants trapped or impaled on the very structure meant to protect them. Rear collisions were no safer, with the cabin structure deforming catastrophically and occupants suffering severe injuries from what would now be considered minor accidents. Safety technology was virtually non-existent in this car, leaving little margin for error. Despite these glaring hazards, the Champion was embraced by the public for its style, affordability, and smooth performance. Its engine was efficient and reliable when it did not catch fire, and the car offered a comfortable ride on the era's rough roads. Its low aerodynamic body reduced wind resistance, and many appreciated the distinctive look that set it apart from other cars of the late 1940s and early 1950s. Families, first-time car buyers, and middle-class Americans saw it as an attainable piece of the modern world, blissfully unaware that each drive carried significant risk. Driving the Champion required constant vigilance, a careful hand, and an awareness that the car could betray its driver at any moment, whether through mechanical failure, structural collapse, or spontaneous ignition. Over time, the Champion's reputation as a hazard grew. Mechanics and safety inspectors documented steering lockups, suspension collapses, and fuel line vulnerabilities. It became clear that the pursuit of lightweight construction and stylish design had come at a deadly cost. The car's thin frame, brittle materials, and lack of crash protection stood in stark contrast to its gleaming appearance, a contradiction that exemplified the dangers of post-war automotive engineering in the race to produce eye-catching, affordable vehicles. Insurance reports and accident studies from the period often highlighted the Champion as one of the riskiest cars on the road, cementing its legacy not as a champion of safety or performance, but as a cautionary tale in automotive history. Today, the Studebaker Champion survives as both a symbol of post-war ambition and a sobering reminder of the dangers inherent in early automotive innovation. Classic car enthusiasts admire its sleek lines, aerodynamic form, and the way it pushed styling boundaries, influencing future sedans for decades. Restored examples are treasured for their historical significance and aesthetic appeal, displayed proudly at car shows and museums. Yet, anyone who drives a Champion today must respect its limitations: the fragile frame, the unpredictable steering, and the mechanical quirks that once made it a hazard for everyday drivers. It is a car that embodies both the promise and peril of its era, a beautifully designed machine with a deadly side, where style outpaced safety and ambition sometimes came at a literal human cost. In the end, the Studebaker Champion remains one of the most fascinating, yet perilous automobiles of the post-war period. A true legend of design, shadowed by its hidden dangers, reminding us how far automotive safety has come since the days of steering locks, brittle frames, and fuel lines that threatened to turn a stylish drive into a tragedy. The Packard Clipper, produced between 1941 and 1947, represented the company's ambition to marry elegance with modernity in a post-war automotive world hungry for style and sophistication. At first glance, the Clipper was a triumph. Sweeping lines, a long, graceful hood, and a streamlined body gave it a look that suggested speed, luxury, and refinement. Its interior, finished with polished wood, chrome accents, and plush upholstery, promised a comfortable ride befitting America's emerging post-war elite. To the public, the Clipper appeared to offer everything a luxury car should, a blend of aesthetic beauty, power, and prestige that could rival even the finest Cadillac or Buick models of the era. However, beneath its stylish exterior, the Clipper was riddled with dangerous flaws that turned it from a celebrated vehicle into a silent hazard on the roads. The car's post-war iterations were particularly heavy and top-heavy, a combination that made handling treacherous. Its steering linkage, although adequate for casual cruising, could fail under high pressure or during abrupt maneuvers, leaving drivers with little control at critical moments. The rigid frame, meant to give the car structural integrity, instead transmitted the full force of any collision directly to the occupants. Without crumple zones or any energy-absorbing features, even minor crashes could result in catastrophic injuries. Packard's use of substandard metals, a consequence of wartime rationing and post-war supply issues, compounded the danger. Early post-war Clippers often suffered from brittle body panels, poor welds, and frames that could crack under stress. In combination with a roof structure that offered no rollover protection, the car became especially deadly in accidents where it rolled or flipped. The electrical system was also notoriously unreliable, with shorts and faults common, sometimes causing fires or disabling key systems in the middle of a drive. Owners frequently reported mysterious engine stalls or flickering dashboard lights, but the more alarming issues were structural and mechanical, invisible until they caused a serious accident. Mechanics and automotive reviewers of the time quickly gained a grim reputation for the Clipper. The nickname "the Silent Killer" spread among garages and dealerships, describing a car that seemed perfectly safe and alluring but carried hidden risks with every mile. The combination of heavy, rigid construction, unstable handling, and subpar materials meant that drivers needed constant vigilance. Any sudden maneuver, emergency stop, or icy patch could transform the Clipper from a comfortable luxury cruiser into a lethal machine, with the rigid steering column and metal dash threatening to injure the driver, and the brittle roof and side panels endangering passengers. Despite these dangers, the Clipper found buyers who were seduced by its aesthetic appeal and the prestige of owning a Packard. For those who understood the risks, it became a test of careful driving, a car to be respected and feared in equal measure. Yet statistics and anecdotal reports from the era reveal a troubling pattern. Accidents in Clippers often resulted in more severe injuries than comparable vehicles, and rollovers were particularly deadly due to the weak roof structure and brittle metals. Insurance companies and safety observers quietly noted the car's shortcomings, even as it continued to be marketed as a symbol of post-war luxury and success. In the historical perspective, the Packard Clipper serves as both a triumph and a cautionary tale. Its design influenced the look of American sedans for years to come, and its elegance remains admired in classic car circles. Fully restored examples today draw attention for their aesthetic achievements, from the curving fenders to the polished chrome and fine interior detailing. Yet for all its beauty, the Clipper reminds automotive historians and enthusiasts that elegance and style do not guarantee safety. Behind the gleaming exterior lay brittle metals, dangerous mechanical quirks, and a structure that could turn a simple accident into a life-threatening event. It is a car that exemplifies the duality of the post-war American automotive industry, a period of innovation and design brilliance shadowed by construction compromises and a startling lack of safety. In this sense, the Packard Clipper remains an unforgettable artifact, admired for its looks, lamented for its danger, and remembered as a vehicle that combined post-war ambition with perilous engineering. The Pontiac Streamliner, produced between 1942 and 1951, was a masterpiece of post-war American styling, embodying the era's fascination with speed, aerodynamics, and futuristic design. Its sleek curving lines, teardrop fenders, and flowing fastback roof made it look like it was moving, even while parked. Interiors were crafted with a sense of understated luxury, plush bench seats, chrome trim, and dashboard instruments that hinted at precision and sophistication. To the public, the Streamliner promised more than transportation.
It offered prestige, style, and a taste of modernity. A car that seemed as much art as machine. Yet behind its alluring curves lurked a host of lethal flaws that made the Streamliner far more dangerous than it appeared. Its straight-eight engine delivered impressive power for the time, allowing the car to accelerate smoothly and reach speeds that few competitors could match. But all that performance was matched by braking systems that were woefully inadequate. The drum brakes, standard for the era, overheated easily, faded quickly, and required long stopping distances, especially on wet or slick roads. Drivers often found that the car would continue to slide or drift uncontrollably when sudden braking was necessary, turning routine maneuvers into dangerous gambles. Visibility, another critical flaw, was severely compromised by the car's sweeping body design. The Streamliner's long hood, sloping windshield, and narrow side windows created blind spots that made navigating crowded streets or avoiding obstacles a constant challenge. Compounding this, the steering column was rigid, tall, and aligned in such a way that in a collision, it could drive straight into the driver's chest, causing devastating injuries. The front bench seat had no seatbelts, a feature that wouldn't become standard for decades, meaning that even minor accidents could hurl passengers into the dashboard with catastrophic force. Combined with the hard, unpadded interior trim and metal-accented dashboards, the car turned relatively low-speed collisions into serious hazards. The Streamliner's weight and handling characteristics further increased its danger. Its fully welded body-on-frame construction, designed more for durability than safety, contributed to a high center of gravity. On wet roads or sharp turns, the vehicle could feel unpredictable, prone to understeer or sudden fishtailing, particularly in emergency situations. Drivers accustomed to lighter or more modern vehicles often found the Streamliner challenging to control, and reports from the era reveal numerous accidents attributed not to reckless driving, but to the car's inherent instability. Despite its hazards, the Pontiac Streamliner attracted buyers who were captivated by its looks, power, and the promise of post-war freedom on the open road. Owners loved its smooth acceleration and commanding presence, but they had to respect the car's dark side, a machine that could kill with surprising swiftness if handled incorrectly. Automotive historians today often cite the Streamliner as a quintessential example of 1940s automotive priorities. Designers focused on style, speed, and luxury, while safety was largely an afterthought, a perilous compromise that left drivers and passengers vulnerable. The Streamliner also illustrates the contradictions of post-war American engineering. Its aesthetic sophistication and mechanical performance reflected a society eager to move forward, embracing technology and the thrill of the automobile. Yet beneath that veneer, primitive safety measures, inadequate braking, poor visibility, and rigid interiors rendered it a potential death trap. Contemporary reviews praised its looks and engine performance, but quietly warned about its handling and vulnerability in accidents. Mechanics and owners alike learned to respect the car's quirks, driving carefully to avoid turning a graceful vehicle into a lethal instrument. In retrospect, the Pontiac Streamliner occupies a unique place in automotive history. It is remembered for its elegance, its powerful straight-eight engine, and its forward-looking design, yet it also serves as a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in early post-war vehicles. Today, surviving examples are treasured by collectors for their beauty and historical significance. But anyone behind the wheel must remember that the Streamliner was not built with modern safety in mind. It is a car that embodies the duality of its era, the optimism and style of the post-war boom, shadowed by engineering choices that made every drive a test of caution and respect for the machine's hidden risks. In this sense, the Pontiac Streamliner is both a symbol of automotive artistry and a cautionary tale. A car that could impress the eye while threatening life with every turn of the wheel.
The Oldsmobile Series 70, produced between 1941 and 1948, was a flagship sedan that represented the automaker's commitment to comfort, luxury, and post-war optimism. On the outside, it exuded the classic American elegance of the era, long, flowing fenders, chrome accents, and a wide, commanding grille that announced its presence on the road. Interiors were designed for a sense of spaciousness, with plush bench seating, wood-tone dashboards, and instrument clusters that suggested refinement and sophistication. Owners were drawn to the Series 70 not just for transportation, but for the status and comfort it projected. A car meant to embody American prosperity and progress during and after the Second World War. Yet beneath this polished exterior, the Series 70 concealed a host of dangerous flaws that made it one of the more perilous vehicles to drive during the 1940s. Its suspension system, designed for smoothness rather than stability, was dangerously soft relative to the car's considerable weight. At highway speeds, this softness caused the chassis to sway unpredictably, leaving drivers fighting the steering just to maintain a straight line. Corners were treacherous. The body would lean alarmingly, while the rear end could slide unexpectedly, creating an easy path to rollovers or collisions. Even gentle maneuvers could become a test of nerve, especially on the narrow, poorly maintained roads common at the time. The Series 70's drivetrain and mechanical systems added to its hazard profile. The column-mounted gear shift, a modern convenience for some, was notoriously prone to jamming mid-shift. Drivers could find themselves stuck between gears while attempting to accelerate, decelerate, or maneuver in traffic, a situation that could trigger sudden, uncontrolled collisions. Coupled with the car's soft brakes, which lacked the stopping power necessary for its mass, the Series 70 demanded constant vigilance and skill from anyone behind the wheel. The car's electrical and structural systems contributed further to its danger. Early Series 70s were prone to electrical shorts beneath the dashboard, creating a genuine fire hazard. The wiring was often routed near heat sources and moving components, a recipe for sparks and ignition during normal operation or after minor collisions. Meanwhile, the steering column was a rigid steel shaft, far from the collapsible designs that would appear decades later, effectively turning itself into a spear during frontal impacts. Occupants who collided head-on often suffered severe chest injuries, sometimes fatal, as the column drove straight into the driver. Even the body construction, intended to convey solidity, betrayed its occupants in a crash. The Series 70's frame and panels were rigid, but thin enough that energy from collisions wasn't absorbed. It was transmitted directly into the cabin. In side impacts, doors could crumple like soda cans, twisting the passenger compartment and leaving very little space for survival. Many late 1940s wrecking yards were filled with Series 70s that had succumbed to relatively low-speed accidents, their bodies contorted into shapes that were nearly unrecognizable. Owners would often remark that the car looked beautiful parked in front of a house, but it became almost a death trap once in motion. Despite these hazards, the Series 70 remained popular during its production run because of its styling, comfort, and the prestige associated with owning a large Oldsmobile. Dealers marketed it as a luxury sedan capable of long, smooth drives, and many families took pride in its spacious interior. But drivers quickly learned to respect the car's dangerous tendencies, carefully modulating speed, avoiding sharp turns, and constantly anticipating the mechanical quirks that could turn a routine drive into a life-threatening scenario. Historically, the Oldsmobile Series 70 is a stark reminder of the priorities of 1940s automotive design. Luxury, appearance, and performance were emphasized, often at the expense of occupant safety. Crashworthiness, energy absorption, and emergency handling were largely ignored or undeveloped, leaving vehicles like the Series 70 as beautiful but hazardous machines. Today, surviving examples are valued by collectors for their elegance, historical significance, and the nostalgia they evoke. Yet anyone familiar with the car's engineering quirks knows that operating one safely requires vigilance, patience, and a deep respect for the physical limits of pre-safety-era automobiles. In the end, the Series 70 embodies the paradox of its era, a car that could impress and delight, but also threaten life at every turn.
a rolling reminder that post-war glamour often came with hidden costs.
The Buick Super, produced from 1946 to 1953, was one of the hallmarks of post-war American automotive optimism. It was a car that symbolized the nation's newfound prosperity. Long, flowing lines, expansive chrome trim, and a commanding presence on the road that spoke of status and success. Inside, the Super offered a level of comfort that few cars of the era could match. Wide bench seats, plush upholstery, and an expansive cabin that seemed to stretch endlessly. Drivers and passengers alike felt they were entering a machine built for the grandeur of a booming post-war America, a vehicle designed for long, leisurely drives down newly paved suburban streets. Yet, beneath this veneer of elegance and power, the Buick Super concealed an array of deadly flaws. Its body was enormous, weighing heavily over 3,500 pounds, yet its suspension was soft and unrefined, creating an unstable platform that was prone to rolling in sharp turns. The steering system, while mechanically adequate, was vague and unresponsive, offering minimal feedback and requiring constant vigilance to maintain control. Drivers who relied on its size as a measure of safety were quickly disabused. The car's mass often became a liability rather than an advantage, especially in emergency maneuvers. The braking system, still reliant on large, single-circuit drum brakes, was woefully inadequate for the Super's heft. Hard stops were slow, heat buildup caused fade, and the car's long, heavy front end made braking imprecise and unpredictable. In collisions, the consequences could be catastrophic. The rigid front end would punch through the firewall, crushing the footwell and pinning occupants with terrifying force. The heavy steel dashboard, adorned with chrome accents and knobs designed for style rather than safety, became a lethal instrument in its own right. The wraparound windshield, a feature meant to enhance visibility and cabin openness, shattered easily on impact, sending shards of glass slicing through the interior. The Super's straight-eight engine was a marvel of engineering for its time, delivering smooth, reliable power that made the car feel effortless on the highway. Yet this very power, combined with the car's top-heavy design, created a dangerous mix. Acceleration could exaggerate the imbalance, steering was sluggish, and the driver's perception of control often lagged behind reality. A slight misjudgment could send the car into a spin or rollover, turning even routine driving into a potential hazard. Owners often described a surreal duality with the Buick Super. On one hand, it was a triumph of post-war design, luxurious, impressive, and supremely comfortable. On the other, it was a vehicle that demanded respect and caution, a rolling reminder of the era's disregard for crash safety. Mechanics and early safety testers noted its tendency to bite in collisions, a result of the combination of heavy mass, rigid construction, and primitive restraint systems. Seatbelts were virtually non-existent, and any collision, even at modest speeds, could result in serious or fatal injuries. Historically, the Buick Super embodies the contradictions of its time. Automakers focused on style, power, and perceived luxury, often leaving driver and passenger safety as an afterthought. The Super's design prioritized presence over protection, performance over precautions, and comfort over crashworthiness. Despite its hazards, it became a popular choice for families and executives seeking an American symbol of success, a car that exuded confidence while hiding a quiet menace in its steel frame. Today, surviving Buick Supers are cherished for their classic lines, opulent interiors, and historical significance.
Collectors admire the car as an emblem of post-war ambition, yet anyone familiar with its engineering quirks knows that driving one safely requires constant awareness, respect for its momentum, and a deep understanding of its limitations. The Buick Super remains a testament to an era when automotive elegance often came with hidden dangers, a car that was as beautiful and commanding as it was unforgiving, a reminder that super, in name, did not guarantee safety in reality.
The Cadillac Series 62, produced from 1941 to 1949, is an emblem of a bygone era of American luxury, an automotive jewel that combined elegance, power, and status in a way few cars ever have. At first glance, it is breathtaking. Sweeping fenders, long hood lines, a chrome-laden grille that shone like jewelry in the sun, and tail fins that hinted at the jet age even before the 50s had arrived. Its presence on the road was impossible to ignore. Driving a Series 62 was not merely a commute, it was a statement, a declaration that its owner had achieved a certain level of taste, sophistication, and prosperity. Interiors were expansive and meticulously detailed, with plush seats, finely finished dashboards, and the kind of knobs, gauges, and trim that were as much about style as they were about function. The cabin was designed for comfort, to cradle passengers in a world where automobiles were increasingly becoming extensions of personal identity and status. Yet for all its beauty, the Series 62 was an extraordinarily dangerous machine. In an era long before seatbelts, airbags, crumple zones, or safety regulations, the car's very strengths, its mass, rigidity, and unyielding metal, became deadly liabilities. The nearly 2-ton body offered no energy absorption. In a collision, all the force was transmitted directly to the occupants. The steering wheel, a thick, solid steel column, could impale the driver in a frontal crash. The dashboard, festooned with chrome and glass, became a field of deadly projectiles. The floorboards and seat structures were rigid, giving little to no forgiveness when the car twisted or crumpled in impact. A seemingly minor collision could result in catastrophic injuries simply because the car refused to deform in a controlled, survivable way. Doors were heavy and prone to jamming, trapping passengers inside, while the expansive body and narrow tires made handling at higher speeds precarious. Brakes, though sufficient for a leisurely drive, were inadequate in emergencies. Drum brakes overheated quickly, and the car's long wheelbase and substantial weight made stopping distances enormous. The driving dynamics of the Series 62 further compounded its danger. Steering was slow and imprecise, with significant play that made quick maneuvers difficult. Its weight distribution, with a massive front end and rigid rear, meant that oversteering or sudden evasive actions often led to loss of control or rollover accidents. Visibility was limited by the car's design. Tall A-pillars and long hoods created blind spots that could surprise even an experienced driver. The suspension, adequate for smooth roads, could not compensate for the unforgiving highways or the sudden potholes and obstacles common in the 1940s. In essence, the Series 62 demanded respect, attentiveness, and a sense of caution that many drivers, enchanted by its style, did not possess. Owners of the Series 62 often experienced this duality firsthand. The car could transport them in comfort and style for hours, turning heads wherever it went, yet a single lapse of judgment could transform the rolling palace into a deadly trap. Anecdotal reports from the period recount occupants being thrown into dashboards, steering columns puncturing footwells, and even minor fender benders causing serious injuries. Despite these risks, or perhaps because of them, the Series 62 became a symbol of daring, wealth, and sophistication, a car that required skill and nerve to master. Mechanics, crash survivors, and enthusiasts alike often remark that driving the Series 62 was a dance with danger, where elegance and peril were inextricably intertwined. In historical context, the Series 62 illustrates the priorities of its time. The 1940s American automaker focused on visual impact, mechanical power, and luxury appointments, often ignoring the very real human costs of crashes. Safety as we know it today, seatbelts, padded dashboards, collapsible steering columns, crumple zones, energy-absorbing structures, simply did not exist. Cadillac and its contemporaries operated under the belief that strength, weight, and refinement were enough to keep occupants safe, a belief that proved tragically misguided. Yet this lack of safety does not diminish the Series 62's cultural and automotive significance. It represents post-war optimism, the American dream on wheels, and a period when cars were more than transportation. They were expressions of aspiration, success, and artistry. Today, surviving Series 62s are coveted collector pieces, prized for their sweeping lines, impeccable interiors, and the aura of classic American luxury. Driving one now with modern knowledge of its limitations evokes a mixture of awe and fear. The car's elegance is undeniable, yet the awareness of its hidden dangers, solid steel steering wheels, unforgiving dashboards, weak brakes, and lack of restraint systems, reminds modern enthusiasts that this icon of design was also a product of a more brutal automotive age. The Cadillac Series 62 stands as a dual legacy, a masterclass in 1940s luxury design, and a sobering reminder of the cost of prioritizing style over safety, a machine where beauty and peril existed side by side in every gleaming chrome detail, every sweeping fender, and every powerful straight-eight engine that could propel a passenger toward both admiration and hazard in equal measure.